Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. And tell me, where are you watching from today? It all started on a bright Saturday morning when my grandson, Liam, came over with that eager sparkle in his eyes. He's 12 now, right at that age where he's growing fast, but still clings to those small moments of wonder. I had been feeling a bit drained lately. My days too quiet, my mind too full of old thoughts. So when he suggested we take a little trip together, just the two of us, I didn't hesitate. We packed light. A small backpack, some snacks, a water bottle, and of course, his ever-present sketchbook. Our destination wasn't far, just a quaint lakeside town an hour's drive away. The kind of place with weathered docks, seagulls circling lazily, and little cafes that smell like fresh bread. I thought it would be good for him to get away from his screens for a while, and maybe good for me to shake off the weight I'd been carrying. As we drove, he talked about his latest school project, a story he was writing about a boy who could talk to animals. His voice was animated, his hands moving as if sculpting the tale in the air, and I found myself smiling more than I had in weeks. The lake greeted us with a soft shimmer, the sunlight dancing on its surface like scattered diamonds. We strolled along the narrow path, the crunch of gravel beneath our shoes, the cool breeze ruffling Liam's hair. At one point, we stopped near a bench overlooking the water. He sat cross-legged, sketchbook on his lap, eyes darting between the rippling waves and his pencil. I watched him, and in that moment, I realized how deeply I'd missed seeing the world through the eyes of someone still discovering it. We had lunch at a small cafe, the kind where the waitress knows everyone's name. Liam ordered grilled cheese and tomato soup, and I had a simple salad. As we ate, he asked me questions about my childhood, my travels, even about the times I'd felt scared. I told him about moving to a new town when I was young, how lonely I'd felt at first, and how I eventually found my place. He listened so intently, not with the distracted nods kids sometimes give, but with genuine interest. Later, we rented a small rowboat. I hadn't rowed in years, but with Liam's encouragement, I found my rhythm. Out there, away from the shore, the world felt still. The water lapped gently against the boat, the air smelled faintly of pine, and for a while it felt like time had loosened its grip. Liam leaned back, watching the clouds drift overhead, and then, without looking at me, he said something that made my hands falter on the oars. "You know, Grandma, you're my favorite person to be quiet with." It wasn't the kind of compliment you hear every day. In those simple words, he told me more than I could have imagined, that he felt safe, that my presence mattered, that even silence between us had meaning. My throat tightened, and I blinked quickly, pretending to be focused on keeping the boat steady. We stayed out there a little longer, neither of us speaking, just letting the wind and water fill the space. And for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter, not because I had let go of my worries, but because I had been reminded that some connections don't need fixing or proving. They just are. When we returned to shore, the afternoon sun was dipping lower, casting the lake in warm gold. I glanced at Liam, and he grinned at me, his cheeks flushed from the breeze. That moment stayed with me, echoing quietly, as we walked back toward the car. The drive back from the lake that evening wasn't meant to be rushed, so I took the scenic route, winding through fields that rolled out in shades of gold and green. Liam had the window halfway down, his hair whipping in the wind, and for a while we didn't talk at all. His words from earlier, about being his favorite person to be quiet with, still lingered in my mind like the last notes of a song. About halfway through the drive, we spotted a small roadside stand selling fresh fruit and handmade crafts. It looked like something out of another time. A wooden stall draped in checkered cloth, baskets of ripe peaches, jars of honey lined up neatly, and a small handwritten sign that simply read, "Cash only." I pulled over, curious, and Liam hopped out before I even cut the engine. He was drawn immediately to a carved wooden bird perched on the edge of the table, its wings spread as if caught mid-flight. The man running the stand was older, with deep lines in his face and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He greeted us warmly, asked where we were headed, and when Liam told him about our trip, he chuckled and said, "Days like these make memories that outlast the years." I felt a quiet truth in his words. I bought a jar of honey and some peaches, and Liam, after a moment of hesitation, asked if he could buy the bird with the small bit of allowance money he brought along. The man handed it to him carefully, as though it were fragile glass, and said, "Every bird needs a good home." Back in the car, Liam held the bird in his hands like it was a treasure. "I'm going to put it on my desk," he said, "so I can remember today when I'm older." That simple sentence struck me harder than I expected. I realized he was already thinking about the passage of time, about holding on to moments before they slip away. It made me think of all the small mementos I'd kept over the years. A seashell from a beach I once walked with my late husband, a pressed flower from my wedding bouquet, a faded ticket stub from a movie I'd seen with my best friend decades ago. We stopped at a small park just outside of town. The sun was lowering, the sky beginning to blush with soft pinks and oranges. Liam wanted to try skipping stones across the pond there. I watched him search for the perfect flat rock, his brows furrowed in concentration. The first few throws were clumsy, but then, finally, one skimmed the surface 3 times before sinking. He turned to me with a grin of pure triumph. I clapped and cheered, as if he just won a medal. As we sat on a bench, catching our breath, Liam asked a question so unexpected it made me pause. "Grandma, what's the happiest day you ever had?" I thought about it for a moment, sifting through years of memories. I could have said my wedding day or the day my children were born, but instead, I told him about a summer afternoon when I was about his age, sitting under a tree with my father, eating strawberries straight from the garden, feeling completely safe and loved. He nodded, as if he understood that happiness isn't always about big events, but about the simple moments that stay with you. The air was growing cooler, and the light was fading. Liam leaned against me, just for a second, before straightening again. "I like days like this," he said softly, "because I can tell you things I don't tell anyone else." His words warmed me more than the sun ever could. I realized then that this trip wasn't just about giving him a fun day. It was about giving both of us a space where honesty felt natural, where love didn't need to be spoken to be felt. When we finally got home, the porch light was on, casting a welcoming glow. Liam carried his bird carefully inside, and before heading to his room, he turned to me and said, "We should do this again soon. Not the same place, just somewhere new." I promised we would. And as I watched him disappear down the hall, I knew I'd hold him to it. 2 weeks passed before we managed to plan our next outing. Life has a way of slipping back into its familiar rhythms, school for Liam, errands, and quiet evenings for me, but his request for somewhere new stayed in my mind. I wanted to find a place that wasn't just a backdrop, but a space that could spark more of those rare, heart-deep conversations we'd had by the lake. After some thought, I decided on a botanical garden about an hour and a half away, somewhere neither of us had been before. The morning we left, a soft fog still clung to the edges of the street, making the houses look like watercolor paintings. Liam arrived with his backpack, the carved wooden bird tucked carefully into one of the side pockets. "For luck," he told me with a small grin. As we drove, we listened to the hum of the road beneath us, our conversations coming in bursts, sometimes about little things, like which cloud looked like a dragon, and sometimes about deeper thoughts that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The botanical garden was quiet when we arrived, the gates opening into a world that felt untouched by time. Winding paths led through arches of blooming flowers, their scents mingling in the air, sweet jasmine, sharp lavender, roses heavy with fragrance. Dew still clung to the petals, catching the sunlight like tiny prisms. Liam wandered ahead, his curiosity pulling him from one display to another, but every few minutes he'd glance back to make sure I was still behind him. We came to a greenhouse, warm and humid, filled with orchids in impossible colors and ferns that reached out like green lace. Liam pressed his face close to the glass of a small butterfly enclosure, watching the delicate creatures flit between blossoms. "Do you think they know how beautiful they are?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I told him I wasn't sure, that maybe beauty isn't something you recognize in yourself until someone else points it out. He seemed to think about that for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as though tucking the thought away. We found a shaded bench under a canopy of wisteria, its pale purple blooms cascading down like a curtain. It was there that Liam became quieter, his fingers idly tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. After a while he said, "Grandma, do you think people change a lot when they get older?" I asked him what he meant, and he shrugged. "Sometimes I wonder if the people I love will still be the same when I'm older, or if they'll forget what they were like before." His words hit me in a way I didn't expect. I thought about my own life, how age changes us, not just in the lines on our faces, but in the way we see the world, in the things we hold on to and the ones we let slip away. I told him that yes, people change, but that the core of who we are, the parts shaped by love and kindness, often stays. And when you love someone, you carry those parts of them with you, no matter what time does. The afternoon drifted by in soft colors and quiet laughter. We shared a small picnic I'd packed, crusty bread, cheese, and a few of those peaches we bought from the roadside stand on our last trip. Juice ran down our fingers as we ate, and Liam made a game out of seeing who could name the most flowers we'd spotted that day. I lost by a wide margin, but I didn't mind. Before we left, we stood by a small koi pond, watching the fish move like living brushstrokes beneath the water. Liam leaned close to the railing, his voice barely above a whisper. "I hope when I'm older, I still remember what this felt like." Something in his tone, part wish, part quiet fear, stirred an ache in my chest. I told him that if he wanted to remember, he should keep finding ways to make days like this happen, and that I'd do the same. On the way back to the car, we passed through a small gift shop. Liam didn't ask for anything, but I saw him eyeing a pressed flower bookmark near the register. I bought it without a word and slipped it into his hand once we were outside. "So you can mark the page on days worth remembering," I said. He looked at me for a long moment, then hugged me without saying anything at all. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind of quiet that felt full, like the air after rain, holding the weight of something important. And in that stillness, I felt sure that no matter how much life changed, we'd always find our way back to moments like these. It was early autumn when our third trip finally happened. The air had turned crisp, and the trees had begun their slow transformation, flames of orange, red, and gold spilling across the hillsides. Liam had been talking about wanting to see the leaves changing ever since school started again, so I suggested we take a drive into the mountains. We packed a thermos of hot cocoa, a blanket, and as always, he slipped the carved wooden bird into his backpack. The road wound upward, the world outside our windows a moving painting of color. Liam had his camera this time, an old digital one I'd given him years ago, and he leaned forward in his seat to snap pictures every time we passed a particularly brilliant cluster of trees. We stopped at a scenic overlook halfway up the mountain, where the valley stretched wide below us, a quilt of fall hues stitched together by winding rivers and distant roads. We laid out the blanket on a flat rock, poured steaming cocoa into small travel mugs, and just sat there, letting the cold air bite our cheeks while the warm drink thawed our hands. Liam was unusually quiet, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Finally, he asked, "Do you ever think about the future? Like, when I'm grown up?" I smiled at him, though the question hit me in that soft, unguarded place in my heart. "All the time," I said. "I wonder who you'll become, what adventures you'll have, and what kind of man you'll grow into." He was silent for a moment before saying, "I just hope I'm someone you'd be proud of." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "You already are." And I meant it, not because of what he'd done or would do, but because of the kindness, curiosity, and gentle heart I'd seen in him since the day he was born. His eyes softened, and for a second he leaned against me the way he had when he was much younger, as if the years hadn't moved at all. We spent the rest of the day wandering along a hiking trail that wound through the woods. The leaves crunched beneath our boots, and every now and then a gust of wind would send a shower of gold and crimson swirling around us. We took our time, stopping to watch squirrels dart through the branches or to examine mushrooms growing at the base of old oaks. Liam pointed out shapes in the gnarled bark. Faces, animals, even what he swore looked like a dragon's claw. At one point, we came to a small wooden bridge over a trickling stream. Liam crouched down, scooping a handful of cold, clear water into his palms. "It feels like the earth is breathing," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made me pause. I realized he was developing his own way of seeing the world, not through the rush and noise of everyday life, but through the quiet, patient noticing of small, beautiful things. We reached the end of the trail just as the sun was dipping low, setting the sky ablaze. Back at the overlook, we sat again on the blanket, sipping the last of the cocoa. The mountains in the distance glowed with fading light, and the air was filled with the faint scent of pine and wood smoke from a cabin far below. That was when Liam reached into his backpack and pulled out the carved wooden bird. He set it gently between us on the blanket. "I want you to have it," he said. I shook my head immediately. "No, that's yours. You bought it to remember our first trip." But he just smiled in that stubborn, gentle way he has. "I know, but I want you to remember too. And I'll remember without it, because it's not the bird that makes the day special. It's you." My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I picked up the bird, feeling the smooth grain beneath my fingers, and realized he was right. Memories live in the people we share them with, not just in the objects we keep. I told him I'd treasure it, and I meant every word. The drive home was wrapped in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. The headlights cut through the dark, the hum of the tires a steady rhythm, and I felt a deep, unshakable peace. I knew life would keep moving. He would grow. I would age. But these days we'd carved out together would remain untouched by time. When we reached my house, Liam hugged me a little longer than usual before heading inside. I stood on the porch, watching him go, the wooden bird warm in my hands from where he passed it to me. And I thought about how, sometimes, the most moving words aren't the grand declarations. They are the quiet truths spoken in moments when the world feels still. That night, I placed the bird on my bedside table. Every time I see it, I'm reminded not just of our trips, but of the boy who taught me that love can be spoken in silence, that connection can live in shared glances, and that some memories, no matter how much time passes, are built to last forever.